Okay, so thanks a lot. And let me also thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak about this work here. My name is Roberto VERDEL. I am a postdoc here at ICTP in the group of Marcello Dal Monte. And today I'm going to tell you about some of our recent work where we explore the use of data-driven approaches to extract physically relevant information of many-body problems. And most of what I'm going to show you today is actually based on our recent publication on PRB that you can check out here. And that was the result of a really nice collaboration with all the people that you see mentioned here. So let me begin by giving you some kind of broad motivation to the topic of my talk. And this really comes from the field of quantum simulation. And I should say from all the amazing developments in this field, which has really opened a new door when it comes to the study of non-equilibrium quantum dynamics. And the key aspects of quantum simulators to make this realization possible is the capability to, probe quantum matter, having control and observation capabilities at the individual quantum level. So what that means is that with current technologies, and also thanks to the developments in imaging techniques, nowadays we can take essentially photographs of a quantum many-body state, as illustrated here from this figure taken from this recent experimental work, where what you see is 3 examples of such snapshots, and in this case of a linear chain of trapped ions, where the ions represent the qubits in this simulator. And what you see there, each bright spot essentially corresponds to a spin pointing down, while the dark squares is a spin pointing up. Now, this is really amazing because these kind of snapshots contain lots of information of your many-body state of interest. There are, however, a couple of remarks that one should make here. The first one is that the number of degrees of freedom that you can probe nowadays with current quantum simulators is already quite large, in the sense that the dimension that you can explore by a number of these realizations is still very small compared to the dimension of the full Hilbert space. So that is to say that an approach like full quantum state tomography is just out of the game for a system like that. And on the other hand, by having this kind of single-site resolution to the system, that also makes them very special compared to other many-body kind of systems like solid-state materials, where of course we don't have this level of resolution. So that brings us to the question as to what's the best way in which we can extract information out of these many-body wave function snapshots. And of course, perhaps the first thing that one could try is to do what we already know how to do. That is, for example, extracting these kind of few point correlators, like a local density, a 2-point correlation function, and so on. And this is an approach that is, of course, based on physical assumptions, and it works very well to describe very interesting physics in many situations, and there are plenty of also experimental works where such an approach has been carried out. However, from a data science perspective, if you want, what we are doing here is a kind of dimensional reduction. The many-body wave function snapshots on that side are really large objects, and by only extracting this kind of few-point correlators, we are reducing the dimensionality of the problem. But in a way, this could be an uncontrolled dimensional reduction because we are not sure whether what we are throwing away is actually, or could contain, let's say, physically relevant information of the system. There are some other reasons why we would like to go beyond this kind of description. And here I'm just showing you 3 examples of what I think represents quite well this point. So the first one is systems for which we know actually that the physics is described in terms of non-local correlations. And the best example here is systems that feature topological phases of matter, where a local order parameter will not tell you about the whole story of the system. Another example, a bit in more broad terms, is when you study non-equilibrium dynamics in a genetic interacting system, it is not always obvious which quantities are the best in order to describe such dynamics. So here is another example where utilizing the whole information content, if you like, of this many-body wave function, snapshots could be of interest. And finally, I think it's also clear that if you want to benchmark the workings of a quantum device, probably you will need to go beyond computing these relatively simple observables that I was showing you before. So all of this tells us that it would be highly desirable to have a new theoretical framework that really leverages on all the information content that these wave function snapshots contain. So today, of course, I'm not going to tell you the final answer to all the questions that I posed before. Instead, I'm going to show you our effort towards building such a theoretical framework, if you like, some kind of baby steps towards that final goal. And the approach that we are putting forward here relies on the following realization that if you think about these wave function snapshots, they are simply data objects. In fact, they are classical data objects. And therefore, it's kind of natural to think of using data science tools to analyze the, as I was saying, the full information content of such objects. And importantly, these tools that come from the field of data science are designed such that you don't need to do any physical assumption to analyze the data. So here's a schematic representation of the kind of approach that I'm going to tell you about today. So our starting point are collections of these wave function snapshots. And at this point, one should note that this could come really from an experiment, from a quantum simulation, or they could be a sample, if you like, also from a classical simulation. So here, what I will have in mind is that these data sets are matrices where the number of rows are the different realizations that we take, the different snapshots, and then the number of columns correspond to the different degrees of freedom that we have in the system. As a second step, we will do this kind of what I call here exploratory data analysis with the idea of discover the hidden structure in the data without making any physical assumption. And hopefully, what you will learn from it will allow you to say something about the physics of the system, which is the last step in this diagram. And I should say it here that, of course, there are many works that, in a way, are complementary to the approach that I was showing you just now. And, of course, I apologize if I didn't include all the relevant words in this respect. So now here's the outline for the rest of the talk. I'm going to start by giving you some kind of little introduction to two of the tools that we use. And then I will show you some examples where we apply these tools to extract information of some many-body problems. The first one involving an experiment with Bose-Einstein condensates. And the second is more recent work that we are doing at the moment, where we try to characterize transport properties of quantum spin chains. Okay, so this is the part regarding the methods. So today I'm going to tell you about two methods that we utilize. The first one is what we call the PCA entropy. And as the name suggests, this is something that is done within the framework of principal component analysis. And is essentially a tool that allows you to quantify the complexity of your data set in a way that I'm going to show you now. So first of all, a little reminder on PCA. This method can be formulated in several ways, but in the end, it's about finding a set of orthogonal directions that successively maximize the variability of your data once you project the data points onto those directions, as illustrated here. One can show that such an optimization problem boils down to actually linearizing a square symmetric matrix, this matrix sigma over there, which you compute from your data matrix. That's the matrix X. So here X really represents, for example, one of these rectangular matrices there. Okay. So suppose that you have solved the eigenvalue problem for that matrix sigma. then you get a set of eigenvectors and a set of eigenvalues. The eigenvectors you actually use in order to define the principal components, in order to find these principal directions. And the eigenvalues, essentially they tell you a little bit of like what's the spread of the data in the corresponding directions. And here we will only utilize the eigenvalues, and we know that these eigenvalues are all non-negative, and furthermore we can always normalize the set of eigenvalues by the total sum of them. So in the end of the day, what they define is nothing but a probability distribution. And finally, we use that probability distribution to define the PCA entropy according to the Shannon formula that is in this square, yellow square. Okay, so here is how it works in pictures. So suppose that your data set looks like that image over there, which is essentially white noise. If you would do the PCA analysis and compute this entropy, as I just told you, you would get a number that is very large. And in fact, it's going to be of order log n, where n is the number of degrees of freedom in your data set. So, and this is very intuitive for an entropy. So the more randomness you have, the larger the entropy will be. On the other hand, if you would have an extremely ordered data set, and of course this is just a kind of toy example, this doesn't correspond to anything, but if you would have something like that, then essentially you just need a single principal component to explain the whole of your data, and in that case, the PCA entropy will be, in fact, 0. So the more correlations you have in the data, the smaller the entropy in the PCA entropy will be. Okay, so yes? Yes, that's actually a very good question. So we have studied the PCA entropy in a few different kind of contexts. But for example, if you apply it to classical systems, let's say classical stat-mech systems at equilibrium, one can always define this PCA entropy with some normalization factors such that it coincides with the thermodynamic entropy in certain limit, for example, at infinite temperature. So in that sense, it has a connection with the thermodynamic entropy. And there is also a recent work by Carlo Vanoni and Vittorio Vitale, where they analyze this kind of entropy for quantum systems, single particle quantum systems, and then they show that, in fact, this quantity is an estimator for the participation entropy of those systems. So there are certainly some connections with physical quantities in some limits. Good. So now I'll tell you about this other method, which I think is very interesting, but perhaps is not so well known, at least in the physics community. And this is known as the information imbalance, which it's a method that will give you a tool to systematically find the most informative subsets of features in your data set. And here by features, I mean really the coordinates of your snapshots. So you can think of each snapshot as a data point in a highly dimensional space, and the coordinates of that point are the features that I'm mentioning here. So this method works by computing what is called distance ranks, and it does so by so selecting two kind of subset of features, and those define two spaces, which here I call space A and space B. So think that you just take a subset of coordinates of your data points, and you compute distances between all your data points, and you rank them according to their relative distance. And then you do the same, but using another subset of coordinates. So those are space A and space B. Now let's say that according to space A, so according to this subset of features, the point I and the point J are nearest neighbors. So I encode that in that matrix RA by putting number 1, and that's the rank of this pair of points, the distance rank of this pair of points. But it could as well happen that if I use this other set of coordinates in the space B, the same 2 points will be now a third nearest neighbor. So the corresponding distance rank in B, in this case, would be 3. And then the information imbalance is computed essentially by this conditional expectation value of the ranks in the space B, conditioned to the points that are nearest neighbors in the space A. So at this moment, this quantity might look a little bit obscure, but my claim is that what this quantity tells you is how well can space A describe the structure of a space B. And there is a way to make this formulation, mathematically formal in probability theory. And for the experts, that's essentially an application of what's known as Sklar theorem. But what is important to point out here is that this conditional expectation value really determines the full correlation structure between the two spaces. Now, a little bit more in plain words, how it works. Suppose that space A and space B are perfectly correlated in the sense that the nearest neighbors according to A are the same as the nearest neighbors according to B. In that case, one can easily compute this conditional expectation and show that it's actually equal to 1. And therefore, this delta from A to B will vanish as 1 over NR. NR here is the number of snapshots that we have, the number of points. On the other case, on the other extreme of things, if the two spaces are completely or perfectly uncorrelated, meaning that the nearest neighbors in A have nothing to do with respect to what you call nearest neighbors in B, then one can also easily compute that conditional expectation value and show that it will actually be equal to NR over 2, and therefore, with this definition, delta is equal to 1. So this quantity goes from 0 to 1, and the closer it is to 0, the better the space A explains the structure of the space B. Now, you can perhaps already anticipate that this is a perfect method to do what is known as feature selection in the following sense. Suppose that I call as space B the space of all the features that I measure, and I take different subsets of features. Here I'm just showing this for two subsets, A1 and A2, and then I compute the information imbalance in the way that I showed you before, and I get something like in this plot. Then I could say that the subset of features A2 are actually quite informative about the full set of observations. And here is a concrete example of that. Suppose that you draw points from a three-dimensional Gaussian where the standard deviation in X is only 1/10 of the standard deviation in Y and Z. So your data cloud is essentially in the YZ plane. And then you call as a space A1 only the first coordinate X, and you measure distance in that way. And the space A2 will be the second and third coordinate, and you measure distance in this way. Then, essentially, what this analysis will tell you is that if you determine distances using the Y and Z component, you can determine the full structure of your data, because X, in this case, is just like some noise. OK, so now I'm going to show you some applications of these methods, but maybe I stop here in case there is questions. Yeah, that's also a good question. And actually, at some point, we were exploring precisely that question, whether we could at least estimate the entanglement entropy from the SPCA. It turns out that there is not a direct relation between these two quantities. But it's more like I said before, you can relate the PCA entropy to the participation entropy, which is the Shannon entropy of the probability density given by the wave function in that case. But as far as we know, we cannot relate it to the entanglement entropy. Yes. Yes, I'm going to show you a concrete example just now. And in fact, it's going to be a little bit different from the beginning because I started by considering snapshots in a lattice, and now I'm going to go to the bulk. So this is a kind of quantum simulator that is off lattice. And it was a collaboration with a group of Markus Oberthaler in Heidelberg. So what we did here was to analyze data sets that had already been used in a different work that you can check out in that really nice paper over there. So here, let me just mention a few technicalities of the experiment. So in this experiment, they prepare a spinor Bose-Einstein condensate using rubidium atoms. And these are put in a trap that has this elongated shape. So it's almost one-dimensional system. And then in the experiment, what they basically perform is a quench dynamics. So they initially prepared all the atoms in the hyperfine manifold with F equal to 1 and substate with MF equal to 0. So you can think of this as a spin 1 system. And then by tuning some lasers in the experiment, they basically perform this kind of quench dynamics. So essentially in pictures, what it happens is you start by putting all the atoms in this substate, and by doing this kind of quench, you bring this level into resonance with the other two levels, and that drives some kind of spin-changing collisions in the condensate and drives it out of equilibrium. So, and then in this experiment, they can take these state-selective, spatially resolved snapshots of atomic populations or densities in all the relevant levels, and these are the kind of snapshots that we are going to analyze here, where you see these kind of gray rows over there corresponding to different levels, and like I said, these are just atomic densities at different in the different relevant levels. Now, there is, of course, a lot of work on this type of systems, and it's understood based on physical arguments, heuristic arguments, that a good quantity to describe these condensates is what is known as the transverse spin of the condensate. And it can be shown that this can be computed from those measurements by taking the imbalance of different populations, as shown here. So the first question that we ask here is whether such kind of dimensional reduction, it's a good one in the sense that I explained at the beginning, namely whether we would obtain a compatible description if we analyze this kind of data in a blindfolded manner, if you like. So without relying on any heuristic argument. So this is just to show you how these data sets look like. So essentially, they measure these densities at different times and in the different substates. And so the different rows, again, correspond to different realizations, and the different columns correspond, in this case, to different spatial locations where they sample these densities. So this is just to say that by simple inspection, of course, you are not going to see any kind of correlation between different observables. Good. So first, we apply the PCA entropy to such data sets, and we do this as a function of time. So for each time, we have 6 matrices for the 6 different observables, and we compute their PCA entropy. And what we see is that as the system evolves, there is a clear separation between 2 groups of observables, and there is clearly 4 observables that develop a smaller PCA entropy. So in that sense, they are more relevant because they seem to capture more of the correlations across the time-space evolution of this system. We went one step further by asking ourselves which concrete combinations of these observables could be more informative. So what we do here is literally concatenate the different data sets as schematically shown there. And we compute again the PCA entropy for all the possible combinations. Here I'm just showing you for combinations with 2 observables. And what we found is that by doing this analysis, there is clearly 2 specific combinations that develop a smaller PCA entropy. And those combinations actually, which are indicated there, correspond to what it was known based on physics arguments that would be like the relevant combinations. So finally, once we have identified these pairs of relevant, or these kind of relevant pairs of observables, we can go one step further and try to really define new operators that would be the most informative ones. So here I'm just showing you for 3 particular combinations. And again, what we found is that the difference of these observables has a lower PCA entropy, and therefore we interpret it as more relevant, and that it's in perfect agreement with these physically motivated kind of ansatz. Good. So at this point, we were quite happy, but when you use PCA, you have to bear in mind that you are kind of assuming that your data is well described by a best fitting subspace. So there is always this kind of linearity assumption that you're making. So we wanted to cross-check whether this analysis was also true using other kind of methods. And here's where we use this information imbalance. So remember that you have to compute, to do this information imbalance, you have to compute distant ranks in 2 spaces. So in this case, our reference space B would be the space of all the different features that are measured for the 6 observables. So you can imagine that each data point has of order 1,200 coordinates in this case. And then as a space A, we take only a subset of those coordinates that correspond to the features for each of the different observables. And so we ask which of those observables describe better the structure of the full space of observations. So very quickly here, I'm showing you the results, again, doing the 3 steps that I showed you before. And the labels here, I'm sorry that I'm not showing them, but they correspond to the same labels as before. So again, we see that the 4 observables that had the lowest PCE entropy, in this case, they also have the lowest information imbalance. I remember that an information imbalance close to 0 tells you that those coordinates can describe quite well the full structure of your space. So in this sense, they are also the relevant observables according to the information imbalance. And this was fully consistent with the results that we got with the PCA entropy analysis. So in a way, it was a nice form to cross-check the results that we were obtaining. OK, so in the last part of my talk, I'm going to show you some ongoing work. And here, really, the main character has been Devendra Bakuni, who has a poster in the poster session. And I also like to advertise the poster by Cristiano, who is working on similar aspects, but for classical StatMech systems. So here, we are going to change again a little bit the setting. So we go back to the lattice. So we have in mind, quantum spin chains. And the question that we are after is whether we could say something about, the transport properties of such systems. So the scheme that we are going to follow is the same as I presented at the beginning. And here are a few results. So first of all, the setting that we have in mind is one typical setting to prove transport. Namely, we are going to study the unitary dynamics generated by some Hamiltonian with some conserved quantities. And we prepared the system initially in a way that it has a kind of kink in one of those conserved quantities, as schematically shown there. And this is, for example, motivated by some recent experiments, like the one shown here, where they study spin transport in the Heisenberg model. And in particular, they are able to prove super diffusive regime that actually falls into the KP set kind of physics. So we apply the same kind of setting, but utilizing these PCA tools and only relying on these snapshots that we are taking from our many body wave function. So here, all that I'm going to show is results from classical simulations. So the first part corresponds to this spin transport. And what I'm showing here on the first row is the growth of the PCA entropy as a function of time. So at each time, we have in this case, an MPS representation of the many-body wave function, and we can sample it efficiently using, for example, perfect sampling. And then we do this PCA analysis, we compute the entropy, and we plot that as a function of time. And we do it here for 3 different values of the anisotropy parameter, which has been shown in previous numerical works that they correspond to ballistic transport, super diffusive transport, and diffusive transport as well. So what we found is that the growth of this PCA entropy captures, or is in a way governed by the dynamical exponent corresponding to the different types of transport. And on the right panel, we show this for different values of the number of realizations. And it's quite remarkable that already for a few hundred of these snapshots, you can recover a signal that allows you to extract the dynamical exponent with a very good accuracy. On the lower row, we plot a different quantity, which is essentially the difference of the largest eigenvalue when you do this PCA analysis on the left half of the system versus on the right half of the system. So this was motivated by the physical quantity that was analyzed in this experiment, this polarization transfer. And what we see is that, again, this is governed by the same kind of dynamical exponents. And in fact, if you plot it together with the polarization transfer, it's basically on top of it. And one of the nice things of PCA is that actually you can understand very well the math that you're doing. So it's only linear algebra. So in this case, we could understand, based on some singular value decomposition theorems, why this quantity was essentially computing the polarization transfer. So, okay, so you could say very well, but in this case, you know that the system, in this system, the magnetization in the z direction is conserved. So you are taking snapshots in that basis. So in a way, it's not so surprising that you can capture, all the transport properties. And based on this observation, we tried to do something a little bit more challenging, which is to study energy transport. So here we took 3 systems with different kinds of energy transport, and this has been studied again in previous works. And in particular, we took a system where the energy is transported in a diffusive way, in a ballistic and a super diffusive manner. And what is shown in the lowest row is a kind of energy transfer that, of course, you can compute from these numerical calculations, but you cannot, as far as I know, you cannot measure in experiments. And on the top panel is really this analysis based on the snapshots, that those you can take certainly in the experiments, and where we compute, again, the spreading of this PCA entropy, or how information is spread as measured by the PCA entropy. And what we see, and I think this is really kind of remarkable, is that the way in which the information is spreading is, again, governed by the relevant dynamical exponents. And again, I emphasize that this is only taking snapshots in one single basis. Okay, so with this, I'm in the end of my talk. And let me just thank all of my collaborators for these works. And I thank you for your attention.
Hey, thanks, Roberto, for the nice talk. Is there any question? You need a microphone?
Yes, just one question about this actually last remark that you did, that actually you only measure in the z basis. So in fact, it's not the whole wave function. Do you have an intuition why it is sufficient to extract this information? Because in general, it should not be the case, no?
Yes, so at least what I think here is that as long as your energy functional has some kind of overlap on the measurement basis that you are taking, it seems that that's enough for the information that is being spread in that representation to be governed by the same dynamical exponents. But that's certainly a question that we are exploring at the moment to try to put on a more solid ground. Yeah.
So it's the PCA entropy. If you took just some, let's say the first or the component of the PCA analysis of the snapshot, then it wouldn't work. I mean, I guess it's related to the fact how this PCA entropy is connected, what you mentioned briefly.
Yeah, that's also a very good point. In fact, for the spin transport, we also check when you do actually something very drastic, and you throw away all the eigenvalues except the first one. So you compute a kind of Shannon entropy for the first eigenvalue, and in that case, it also captures correctly the dynamical exponent. But also, if you look at the PCA spectrum in this case, you see that there is quite drastic separation between the first eigenvalue and the rest of the spectrum. For the energy transport, that's not so clear. And here, actually, I don't remember if we try computing this quantity only with a few of these eigenvalues. But in general, if you have this separation between some part of your spectrum and the rest, you could as well just use the most important eigenvalues, I would say. But I mean, doing this kind of analysis is very cheap, so you can, in principle, consider all the spectrum and get the full information out of it without.
And these deviations at later times is a problem of your, I don't know, how you get the snapshots? It's not a problem of them.
You mean the
like
saturation?
It's somehow said, yeah, it's going beyond.
Yeah.
It's
I think
finite size or something.
that would be kind of finite size effect, I think. And yeah, one should also note that the saturation, for example, on this energy transfer occurs at later times in general with respect to this PCA entropy. But I think, yeah, we don't expect to capture the full information about the energy transferred by only taking measurements in a single basis. So, yeah.
Further question?
Yeah, thanks. So I have a question to the first part, the Heidelberg data, basically. So in the regime where you evaluated this, I mean, data was still, I mean, the state is still time evolving, so there's also still dynamics happening. Could you also get information from the structure of the eigenvectors, basically from the PCA analysis that you get, and not only the eigen? So can you say something about the relevant structure, maybe spatial structures or so?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, in this case, we didn't look at the eigenvectors. We did look at a different kind of description of the system. So if you look at the physics of the system, there is a regime where it actually exhibits self-similar dynamics. And our original target was to describe that from the data science perspective as a kind of simplification of the data structures that you are getting. And that's more or less what you see when you look at the first plot there. You see that in general, the complexity as measured by this PCA entropy decreases as a function of time. So we analyze a different quantity, which is known as the intrinsic dimension, to measure precisely this. And in that case, we could also kind of extract the universal regime for the dynamics that is revealed by a kind of plateau in this intrinsic dimension. But in terms of PCA, we didn't look at these eigenvectors. So I cannot tell you more about it.
That thing, kinks, show you the eyes that can go there, please.
You mean in the second part?
Yes. I have a, next, please. Let me see. No, next, please. Yes. That can simulate the topological defects in the initial state.
So what we do here is the precise protocol that we follow here is we compute the ground state of the left part of the chain with a corresponding Hamiltonian. and we put that left part in the ground state. And then for the other half of the system, we compute the highest excited state, so minus the ground state of the other part. And that generates a kind of energy kink when you look at the initial energy density profile. So it would be something like this. You have one half of the chain that has a larger energy compared to the other half. And then we just do the unitary evolution of that initial state.
But that things can be compared to a topological defect in the initial state. In the sense that you have one wall that separates two parts, two phases in the system.
Yeah, essentially the question that we are asking in this setting is how the conserved quantity is sort of redistributed when you start from this inhomogeneous initial state. I don't know if you can relate it to the notion, I mean, for sure there is the notion of a topological defect, but I don't know if you can express it in terms of, you know, the spreading of such topological defect or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's thank Roberto again for the talk.